Okay, this is fun. Oh man, this is great. So marketing data, right? Super digestible. Everybody's like, okay, did they click my ad? And then did they buy from my ad? That question this past week, I had that conversation with my 5,000 person company and my 10 person company. And we just looked at the data, and obviously the one company was spending whatever, make up the numbers, but a few $1 million that month. And the 10 person company was spending a few $1,000s that month. The question is the exact same. Did they buy from this ad? And if the conversion rate was low, which it was for both of them, why didn't they? Was it because the ad wasn't good? Was it because the homepage that they landed on wasn't good? Or are we targeting the wrong people? Probably one of those three situations, right? And it was the exact same conversation. It is a little bit easier for the 10 person company because you're targeting, 200 people as opposed to 20 million people. But it's the same basic principles.
This is the Play Your Position podcast, where we huddle up, call the plays, and inspire you to run your ball into the end zone. Are you ready to score more game-winning touchdowns in your life, business, and career? Then listen up, because it's game time, baby. Now, here's your host, Mary Lou Kaiser.
Hello, Team PYP. Mary Lou Kaiser here. Welcome to another episode of the Play Your Position podcast. Today is a day for conversation. I have an amazing guest who is kind enough to join us and share insights about his leadership journey, along with what his company does and how he brings value to the world. And I'm sure he's going to drop some awesome bombs on us today about how we do this thing called life, because we all have questions about that every single day. His name is Jack Tompkins, and he's coming to us from the beautiful state of North Carolina. So Jack, are you ready for kickoff?
Absolutely, Mary Lou. Let's do it.
Awesome. So team, this is what I know about Jack Tompkins. He is the owner of a consulting firm with an awesome name, Pineapple Consulting Firm, and it is based out of Charlotte, North Carolina. He helps you analyze and visualize your data in interactive dashboards so you can get all of the insights from your data without actually touching it. His goal is to help you grow profitably while giving your data a seat at the table and becoming a bit more data-driven. And Jack, I know there's a lot more to your story, so let's just jump in and have you lead us off with telling us your story about when you got the call to leadership. How old were you and what was going on in your life when you realized, wow, I think I'm on this path?
Yeah, it's kind of it wasn't too many years ago. I've always been kind of independent, but it didn't necessarily make myself a leader. But back in the corporate world, probably 3-4 years ago, maybe even 5 years ago, I started running a team and then ran a couple teams, and I absolutely loved it. And then from there, kind of started my own business, and now have led the business, and I have a couple employees and lead in sort of a data field for a small business. So it's kind of taken off from there, and I absolutely love it. It's so much fun.
Yeah, it is fun. And tell us the origin of Pineapple Consulting Firm. How did you come up with that name?
Yeah, it was a couple factors. So I'm originally from Connecticut, but I was moving down to Charlotte, North Carolina, and Southern hospitality is very much a thing. So I wanted to embrace that. And the pineapple is a symbol of Southern hospitality. It doubles as a symbol as vacation for me. So I love to be able to help small business owners actually take a vacation. It's kind of the opposite of data, which is what I do for my business. Pineapple is a very sweet, vacationally fun symbol, and data has the complete opposite connotation. So it's kind of a fun juxtaposition.
That is fun. It's also very catchy. I mean, it's hard to forget that name, which, in business is half the battle sometimes. You want to stand out in the sea of lookalikes. And certainly that's not you. So tell us more about what you do. How do you help businesses make sense of data? We hear this word data thrown around all the time. If you're on social media, especially places like LinkedIn, you see posts about data this and data that. And honestly, for a lot of people, they still feel like they're on the outside of what that actually means, especially for them. And I would love for you to take us inside maybe a day in the life of Jack Tompkins, and what kinds of conversations you're having with people.
Yeah, I think you're exactly right, Mary Lou, where everybody hears the word, everybody's familiar. It's nobody's favorite word, except for a couple data nerds like me, right? But it's everywhere. And it's a lot of people are kind of on the outside looking in. That's actually a great way to put it. And it's not something that's readily digestible. It is readily available and is all over the place. And if you're a small business owner and you have QuickBooks, that's data. If you have a CRM system that manages your leads and your marketing stuff, that's data. If you were just a person who back in the pandemic, it was actually pretty good for the data industry because everybody wanted to know, okay, what are the stats from today? And is this real? Is this the right number? Is this the right way to look at it? So anything from a real life, obviously extreme scenario with the pandemic to an everyday somebody paid you on QuickBooks, all of that is data. Making sense out of it is the hard part. I'm a huge fan of visualizing it, which literally means putting into bar graphs, charts, indicators of up or down versus a different time period kind of thing. All of that stuff really helps make it digestible, helps it be understandable by anybody, whether you are a data person or not. And so that's a very typical, that's a lot for the day in the life, right? But all of that stuff is constantly ringing in my head of how can I make this easier? How can I make this better for small businesses, for owners, for the people that work for them? And I love it.
Yeah, I can tell. I can hear it in your voice that it gets you excited. So when you're sitting down with leaders and you're looking at data sets, how are you helping them use what they're seeing in ways that actually get them some kind of new results that they haven't been getting? Can you give us a for instance?
Yeah, absolutely. So the generic way I'll put this to start is what worked well and what didn't work, right? And then how do we build a strategy based off of that? So I have one client who's in the logistics industry, and I use this because it's a pretty understandable business model. It is person drives truck, drops package off at a house, drives to the next house, rinse and repeat. So we ended up building 6 or 7 dashboards, and it was financial and it was operational and it was efficiency and it was all this stuff. And that sounds overwhelming, but we took it one step at a time, and it started with one simple thing. And that was how many stops did he make that day? Or did the company make that day? And if he knew that, he knew how many packages he dropped off. And if he knew that, he knew how efficient he was, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. It just sort of builds. So to your question, you don't have to have all that in mind from the start, but we have the conversation of, okay, let's focus on this one big thing, and then let's think about the next step. And was that a good number? Did you make the most efficient number of stops that day? And could you increase the number of packages that day? And with the data there and the data being visual, it's something that's very easy to understand and very easy to get a hold of. So it makes them on the fly develop their strategy a little bit better.
Okay. So I'm curious, how do you use data, Jack, to evaluate your performance as a leader? Do you have a system or systems that you've either developed or adopted? And what do those look like?
Yeah, it's such a good question because financials are easy, right? But getting that, I'll call it almost anecdotal feedback, right? What are the people that work for me? What are they feeling? That's a little bit less quantifiable. So I generally have conversations with the people that work for me, and whether they're a resource or employee or anything like that, it's, hey, how did this go? We have a weekly retrospective, as we call it. And it was, hey, how did last week go? Give me some highlights, give me some lowlights. And is it necessarily data? Yeah, but it's not what you think of, just like columns and rows of numbers. It's still a bullet point of, you gave me really good instruction and this worked really well because of that, or I was unclear in this direction, so it took me longer than I wanted. And all that stuff kind of builds. And much like I was saying with the transportation guy, it is just that one step at a time, continuously building.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's easy for small business owners and certainly in corporate America, which you worked in, to get overwhelmed with the amount of information that comes in. And it's coming in at us at rapid fire pace. So when you're out and about and you're engaging in conversations with whether it's small business leaders or maybe it's team leaders within a larger organization, what are you hearing them saying is maybe overwhelming or frustrating, that things that come up again and again that you then are able to say, oh, that you're dealing with this kind of a issue? I'm just wondering what kind of patterns, you're hearing leaders talking about, isn't working.
Right. No, it's such a good question because in the world that I live in, the small business world, I typically work with service-based companies. And so the problem that I hear a lot is dealing with clients. And that's really, it's a common thing, right? Everybody kind of rolls their eyes because you always have that one bad client that you think of. Obviously, most clients are pretty reasonable, but it's not meant to be a bad thing. It's, hey, we spend a bunch of time on this one client and they're still asking for more, or they're doing scope changes, right? And stuff like that is continuously happening. How do we handle this? And how do we have that conversation with them? Should we just change the price? Like, what does that look like? And I have a client of mine in particular who I'm thinking of, he uses the data and stuff to actually have those conversations with his clients. And so it's how do we manage this relationship? How do we make it the best possible situation for both parties? Make sure that we're getting paid appropriately, make sure they're getting the value that they want. And obviously I have the data skew of all of that and making sure all the numbers check out kind of thing. But from just a more human side of things, it's really about those relationships. And I love the fact that the data can feed the relationship and make even that piece of a small business better.
Interesting. I never thought about how a data set could actually improve a relationship. And it sounds like, what is that? What would someone in that situation do? Like sit down with the client and say, look at this chart. Like, how do you help them translate the information that you have that, like you were saying earlier, can be all over the place and not make sense to someone who isn't trained to understand how to make sense of it, right? So how do you help them translate that so that they can have a conversation that leads to a win-win?
Yeah, it's right. How does boring Excel lead to a positive conversation? There's a couple parts to it, and I would say number one. I'll use the metric, if you will, hourly rate. So like we're working with a client, and our hourly rate is way below what we want it to be. If we want it to be 100 and it's 50, right? Easy numbers. Okay, let's talk about that. And why is our hourly rate so bad? Did we do way too much work? Did they ask for too much? And so that number, that data points you in the right direction of, okay, here's the problem. Or on the opposite side, here's the great part of this relationship. Why did that happen? And then you get the human element involved. And then you think, okay, now, if you're familiar with like RCPS, root cause problem solving type of thing, it's we identified the issue, we talked about the issue, we know what's happening. Now we can have a discussion that's not really, hey, Mr. and Mrs. Client, check out this chart. It's, hey, we've been kind of feeling this. We wonder if you feel it too. Let's kind of work together because we want this to be a partnership. And so it's really just the first domino to fall, if you will.
Right. I think having those kinds of conversations is one of the hardest things about being in business, leading and it sounds like you work mostly with small businesses that don't have deep pockets and a gazillion departments where, the leader is more removed from those kinds of conversations. A small business is everybody's involved, it's all hands on deck. And right. I'm wondering, when it comes to data sets, is the data that a company, say like Google, which is huge, or Apple, which is huge, that they collect outside of volume, is there much difference between what your interpretations are of data sets that are more small business oriented, do you think? I'm just curious if, again, a company like Google is going to collect massive amounts of data because they have so many users, whereas a small business isn't going to have that same dearth of clients. But are there certain things that it comes down to over and over again that the data is revealing?
Yes, I love this question so much because what's the difference between me and Google, right? The amount of data, right? The volume of it, but you're still looking at the same things. I've worked in corporations with a few thousand employees, 20, 25,000 employees. I have a client now who's far outside my normal, who's a few thousand, 5,000 or 6,000 employees. And Can I tell you, it's the exact same conversation. It is the exact same
Is
conversation.
it really?
Yeah. And now the more data there is, the more problems there are, but they're all related to the same exact things. You might just have to talk to 3-4 people to get the answer, as opposed to just talking to the business owner in a 5-person company. It is all the same process. It is all the same thoughts, just on different scales. It's such a good question. Thank you.
Okay. So I'm gonna take it one step further. What's an example of one thought that's the same?
One thought that's the same. Yeah. Okay. Okay. This is fun. Oh man, this is great. So marketing data, right? Super digestible. Everybody's like, okay, did they click my ad? And then did they buy from my ad? That question this past week, I had that conversation with my 5,000 person company and my 10-person company. And we just looked at the data. And obviously the one company was spending whatever, make up the numbers, but a few $1 million that month. Mm-hmm. And the 10-person company was spending a few $1,000s that month. The question is the exact same. Did they buy from this ad? And if the conversion rate was low, which it was for both of them, why didn't they? Was it because the ad wasn't good? Was it because the homepage that they landed on wasn't good? Or are we targeting the wrong people? Probably one of those 3 situations, right? And it was the exact same conversation. It is a little bit easier for the 10-person company because you're targeting, 200 people as opposed to 20 million people.
Right.
But it's the same basic principles.
Yeah. Well, that is, that's reassuring that I think it's easy when you're small to have a conversation of, the reason that we're not getting the results we want is because we don't have the same budget as fill in the blank, a Google or an Apple. And that's actually not true. The fact of the matter is, whether you're spending, it sounds like, millions of dollars on ads to reach a new audience or your existing audience, just maybe offering something new versus, like you said, 200, you've targeted 200 people.
Right.
The questions of why didn't this work, or the flip side, why did this work, are the same.
Yeah. And you get to be, there's a pro and a con for being small. You get to be more agile and change on the fly quicker. You also have to be more agile to compete with the big fellas.
Right.
But yeah, it's very, 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 very similar conversations.
Yeah. So who has more power right now, consumers or businesses?
Oh, wow. I might have to think about that. Oh my goodness, that's such a good question. I would say consumers in the world that we live in today with, think just like the great not recession. What people leaving their jobs? What is that? Resignation.
Oh, the what is it? Not silent resignation. Right now I have quiet quitting and quiet firing on my mind. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah. So even that sort of stuff, right? It's not necessarily a consumer type conversation, but that is all a symptom of people. And actually, I listened to one of your episodes of maybe 4 or 5 episodes ago. Was making sure you're doing what you love was the kind of the punchline of it. And that's what a lot of people are in right now. And consumers are in that spot where if they don't love the job that they're at, they switch immediately. If they don't love the product that they're using because of whatever reason, they're just going to go switch to another one. So I think the balance has kind of shifted towards consumers. That's such a good question, though. It's always going to be a hot topic.
Yeah, it is a hot topic. And I read articles that are based, I'm guessing, on data sets of, when you read stats or you read these reports of how many people are hopping
right.
or simply removing themselves from those channels. They're done. Obviously the pandemic ushered in people's decision to, I'm in my mid-50s. I was going to retire when I was 63, but you know what? I'm just going to do it now. So I think there's a lot of, I would call it like data on the edges that we don't have a grasp of yet. Would you agree with that?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think that's fair. And it's to the thing that we're talking about at the beginning of this conversation. It's data's everywhere, right? And when you see those stats online, you see all these people quitting and you see all that stuff. I think people now have the thought of, well, let's dive more into that number, right? Is that the real number? Did they skew it? Because there are, this is a saying from a long, long time ago, there's statistics or sorry, there's liars, there's damn liars, and then there's statistics. So I think people have that sort of mindset of they're more familiar with the data, although that edge data is always that weird case of, was it that 1 in a million situation? Was it the what if scenario? I don't know. I could go on forever, but there's a lot of good conversations around data quality these days.
Right. Which makes me wonder, in what ways is data biased?
Yeah. Which is so funny to think about, because this raw number, right? 5 people bought our product. Well, how is that going to be biased? Well, I could swing it in 10,000 different ways and tell any story you want. So the data is super important. The story from it is really what drives decisions, though.
It's halftime here at the Play Your Position podcast, and we've got ourselves a great game. While you're up grabbing another snack and topping off your favorite beverage, make sure to subscribe to the show so you never miss another play. PYP is available on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, and wherever great podcasts can be found. Now, let's get back to the game.
You and your company are in a very interesting position, because you're taking the raw material, basically, like you went out, say you were gold mine, you were panning for gold, and you got this pan of all the stuff, and then you sifted through it and you found the gold. But now, in a way, it's filtering through what you understand, your experiences, and how is what you do? I mean, I guess, is there such a thing as something that is completely objective, or is the human element always going to play a role? Because at the end of the day, you're the bridge between the raw data and then the story or the visualization that goes out. And not just you, I mean, the royal you, whoever it may be.
Right. No, I think it's so good, because I like I was kind of saying earlier, I love speaking. I love presenting. And when I talk to people think like, oh man, it's the data guy. He's going to say, just trust your numbers. And like, this is going to be boring. It's a lot of fun, I promise. But part of that is always, the data is always going to be there. Interpreting it and actually bringing in the human element is going to be what really sticks with people. So to your point, I don't know if there's a single thing out there that's completely 100% objective. I'm sure that there are. I don't have any examples off the top of my head, but if you think like, so we just had a hurricane, right? 100,000 homes were destroyed. I have no idea. I'm making that number up. You could take either side of that of, oh man, I'm so glad it wasn't a million homes, or look, more than one home was destroyed. That's a travesty, right? It's just about the human bridge. I love that phrase. I'm going to steal that. The bridge of the human connector. I think that's it, from data to person to the secondhand source. That person who's interpreting it is a very, very critical role.
Oh, incredible. I mean, the work that you do, Jack, is incredibly critical, because so many people, as we were talking about earlier, feel intimidated by, overwhelmed by, completely in the dark by anything to do with technology. And then you start talking data and their eyes roll back in their head and they're like, you're talking a language I will never understand. Just tell me what to do. Well, that's a dangerous position to be in, because if you don't have, if the person that you've just said that to has nefarious inclinations, it's very easy to be taken advantage of,
Right.
I was just having a conversation earlier today with a man who's he builds customized software for mostly enterprise level companies that have reached a level of maturity where like an off the shelf kind of system no longer fits what they need to do. And, one of the things that you do that makes me think of his work and also my own experience as a solopreneur is this avalanche of technology that has, cascaded over all of us in the last 15, 20 years. You could go back into the 90s, certainly, but really it was the mid 2000s when, social media hit, Facebook and all these giants now, even Google, that have now come to really rule our lives, whether you like it or not, they do,
Right. Oh, absolutely.
And, we need people like you who really are the translator, where we can trust you to say, or to give us the best truth you can, that you're not coming in and saying, oh, yeah, I see you have this problem, and then taking the money and disappearing, which I had that happen to me with a website builder, and that's just a small example of that. When you have the good guys like yourself who say, listen, I can help you interpret this data set that is mind-boggling to you and have it work for you versus, the other stuff. And it's, I don't know if this barrier between the human experience and the technological world will ever completely mesh. I don't know if maybe it will. I mean, what are your thoughts on that? Will there ever come a day, maybe this Gen Z and younger, because they're digi natives, won't have the same gap that us Gen Xers and I don't know what generation you are. I'm a Gen Xer. So
I'm a millennial. I'm a fairly young millennial. I'm 29 as we record.
Okay. Yeah.
So I grew up with a lot of technology, but still it's a very different comparing me at 29 to somebody at 22. So it's two very, very different frames of reference with technology. And it's when I'm back in my day.
I love it. I love that you can say that.
Right. But if I had a question, I was like, my parents know everything that there is to know in the entire world. So I'm just going to ask my parents. Today, people's instinct is, I'm just going to go Google. And I think a lot of people have shifted, right? But these, I'm going to continue sounding older than I am, but these kids these days, they they just have that instinct of, why would I ask a person? I'm just going to Google it real quick. And to your point, once you get that answer, now somebody on the other side of that equation has transformed the data into something that somebody else is now using. And that 15-year-old who's Googling it in the middle of their Spanish class or whatever is taking that as the truth. So, I mean, which we've talked about before, that middleman, that translator becomes a very critical thing, because that meshing of human and technology is never 100% mesh. No, but they're so hand in hand, and they're such a part of everyday life together that anything to do with data, it matters a lot.
Okay. You just brought up a very big philosophical question about the way we have trained essentially ourselves, and then offspring, and they'll do the same to get the answers to questions. Just Google it, right? Just go online. And then this comes back to my question earlier about the bias in data. And if I was just having this conversation the other day. So I have some friends who live in the UK and Sweden. We're in a mastermind group. And apparently there was a company that was able to SEO. There was a word, and I, now that I'm thinking through this example, I'm not sure I want to, it's not a bad word. It's just the example. I'll just say that the word was weasel. Okay. And they were able to SEO the algorithm so that if anybody typed in anything having to do with weasel, a certain political figure picture came up in the very first spot. And so I'd love to get your perspective, since this is the world you move in, on data manipulation from, I guess, I don't know, is it a programming point of view? Like these people who understand how to get in there and manipulate data to show certain things that come up first, which then that 15-year-old might stumble across and take it as truth when it's not.
Right. That's a bad thing to do, but that is very impressive to associate those two things. I mean, I guess kudos to them for doing that, but obviously a terrible thing to do. So to your question, that's it's tough. And I think that's where the human element kind of wins over versus data, right? Because if the 15-year-old, right, Google's weasel and that political figure comes up, they might second guess it. And I think that second guessing is very healthy. And I think that's positive in a lot of ways. And maybe like different example, maybe they Googled something that seemed fishy, but ends up being true. They still thought about it, and they still had the thought of, well, let me double check this with another source or something. And kind of like I was talking about earlier with data quality, people were questioning that, especially during the pandemic, right? I mean, politically, right? Each side had their own view of the numbers. The right answers typically, I mean, statistically, some were probably in the middle. So all that stuff requires a second opinion, asking somebody in real life instead of Googling it, right? Bringing in that extra human element to basically quality check any sort of data that you see out there.
Yeah. Okay. So as a millennial, what are some of the conversations that you and your peers have about the rise of the influence that technology is having on our real lives? I'm just curious if there's a lot of talk about this, the generational differences. I've had numerous conversations on this show with people about the fact that we have 5 generations all working in the workforce today. And as somebody who is 29 and, smack in the middle of a lot of change in the last few years, I mean, what are some of the concerns and conversations that you have with your peers about where we're headed?
Yeah, we could have a whole nother episode on that one. That's
I know
big
we could. I'm just curious, like for a couple of instances, because it ties into the work you do.
Yeah. Oh, it totally does. I'll give more context. I'm a millennial, but I'm a very bad millennial because I have no social media other than LinkedIn. Like,
interesting.
It's just never really been my thing. And I have people like friends of mine that come up to me like, hey, like, I couldn't find your business on Instagram. Every single business in the world should have an Instagram page. I was like, oh yeah, like I don't have a personal Instagram. Like maybe I should eventually have an Instagram for my business, but I don't right now because it's just so far from my focus. Like that's nowhere near the top of my priority list. So it's a very different mindset talking with even some of my friends versus some of my very, very good business colleagues that are, 50, 60, 70, anything like that. And they don't care about Instagram. They're not going to go find me on Instagram. Mm-mm. So, right. I mean, things like that are just, how do you be the, no pun intended, but be the jack of all trades to all these different groups of people. And I think it's very difficult. And I don't think that you have to. I think you can kind of stick to your lane and whatever feels most comfortable to you and what works best. And I think I'm kind of veering away from your question. I apologize.
No, you're not really, actually.
Okay, perfect. I think just kind of sticking to your strengths, sticking to what you like, sticking to what makes you feel good, both in personal life and in business, I think works. And I have a very good friend and she's a girl, she's 27, I don't know. And she gets along phenomenally with 50-year-old men. They're just like, they bro out and they hang out and they talk sports. And that's her demographic. And that 100% works. Now she gets along with everybody else her age too. But there's nothing wrong with any of that. And I think from a business perspective, same sort of situation. Whatever's working for you, whatever data you want to follow, whatever group you mesh with, you don't have to exile the other ones. You can make that your target one, but obviously be open to all the other ones too, because you can learn something from a 7-year-old as much as you can learn from a 20-year-old, right? It's going to be 2 very different perspectives. It's going to be 2 very different data points, right? Tying that back in. But use your own second opinion of say, okay, I'm going to land somewhere in the middle, or I think this one's more correct than this one. Having both sides of the equation or all 5 generations side of the equation, I think is important.
Mm-hmm. No, I agree with that. I think every generation I think every human has something to contribute to the conversation. And if we would just allow more of these, what I would call organic conversations, like what you and I are having today, where we're just really, talking about things. And yes, it's related to this work that you do, but it's also related to the bigger picture of we're all in this together,
Right.
These changes have affected all of us in all fairness, to differing degrees. Mm-hmm. I'm curious, how did you arrive at the decision not to have social media in your life except for LinkedIn?
I honestly, I had Facebook for probably like 6 months in high school, and I saw some of my friends just be absolutely obsessed with it for probably mostly bad reasons objectively, but some were good. I don't want to be completely bashing it, but Facebook was huge when I was in high school. That was the thing. I don't think Instagram was around yet. And it controlled people in a way that I didn't really want for myself. And again, not all of that's bad, not all of that's good, but it was something that I could see myself spending, just the infinite scroll rate that everybody does on TikTok and Snapchat and everything these days. I could see myself getting lost in that. And I'm a huge fan of efficiency and productivity. So any extra minute that I'm spending on that was something that it was being taken away from something else that I viewed as more positive for myself, for my goals. Always wanted to know, or always wanted to start my own business. And I knew that scrolling through my friends' pictures on Facebook wouldn't get me there quicker. So it was in the data-ist, nerdiest way, it was a math equation, right? It was minutes spent on Facebook equals one less minute spent on potential business. And it ended up being that simple for me.
That's so beautifully said. It really does come down to a math equation. I don't know if there's anybody listening who hasn't experienced the infinite scroll at least once.
Right.
And then how do you feel after that? Right. Drained, depleted. I mean, I asked myself that. I mean, I'm like, okay. And literally it's a self-talk. And I wanted you to answer that. And you did, you answered it so great because you really modeled the self-talk and you took us into the steps almost that you went through. You made an observation with your friends. You realized, ew, that doesn't, I don't like that. And then you started applying that situation to what your goals were, how you wanted to spend your time.
Right. Yeah.
And
I don't know. I'm just agreeing as you go through the process. And I'm not anti-social media. I'm not, but just for me, it came down to math.
And it comes down to math for all of us, because you can't get time back. The hour that you and I are spending together is an hour that we committed to having a conversation. And that's, in my opinion, time well spent, because we're talking about things that are relevant to the journey that listeners are on, that you're on, that I'm on, even though we're at different points in our lives. The fact of the matter is, this convergence between real life and technology is becoming more and more. I don't even know if the parent is the right word. It's like we all know it's here. It's like, okay, it's here.
Right.
Now what do we do with it? And your ability, again, to use the metaphor of being a bridge between those who didn't grow up in a time, who remember life before the internet, who remember life before data sets in the way they're presented today. Data has always been around. It was just talked about differently in, I don't know, the 50s, the 60s, the 70s, the 80s, and because there are so many different ages and experiences all operating together in communities and companies and schools, these kinds of conversations need to happen more often, because if anything, it helps people make sense for themselves. Like, oh, I'm not the only one. Like, I'm wondering if there's a listener today who heard you say it comes down to a math equation, who's like, yes, that's what I've been saying. They may have, their lives may be filled with the friends you saw obsessed with Facebook, and now it's obsessed with Instagram or TikTok. I think TikTok is overtaken everything. It seems like I've never been on TikTok. Right. I don't want to go on TikTok. I just don't have time.
And that's the thing. It takes a lot of time, and people love it. People learn a lot from Instagram. Some of my friends have taught me things, from TikTok. I mean, probably from Instagram too, but some of my friends have taught me things that they learned on TikTok. And I'm like, that's fantastic. I love learning. I think everybody does, right? But in the most CEO way, I'm like, cool, you spend all the time on TikTok, then give me the highlights. And I'm good.
Show me the bullet points. Isn't it? I just thought of this, and I'm sure I'm not the first one, but I think it's ironic that it's called TikTok. Like, your time is ticking away as you are.
Oh my goodness, you're so right. I didn't think about that. Yeah.
It's like this giant clock that's just of your life is ticking away every time you go. Wow.
Yeah.
I tell you. Well, Jack, I'm sure there are people who would just love to learn more about you, check you out on LinkedIn, on your website. So where do you hang out online? You said LinkedIn. So is that a good place for people to connect with you? And what about your website?
Yeah, LinkedIn is great I'm always on it. And I'm Jack Tompkins on there. You can Google Pineapple Consulting Firm. I'll come up with either of those. And then my website, also a good place, more on me, the company, examples, more data stuff too. Fun stuff, I promise. And that is pineapplecf, as in pineappleconsultingfirm.com.
Awesome. So team, the links to connect with Jack will be on his show notes page at pyppodcast.com. You can also go right to LinkedIn, as he said, type in his name and find his website. And again, if you're on the outside of data and have questions, I'm hoping that the conversation you just listened to tells you that Jack is someone you can trust, someone who can help you make sense of why things are happening in your business or why they're not. And we can all use more of that. So this has been a lot of fun. And as we wrap things up, would you share with us who your team is, Jack? Who are you cheering for on Saturday and or Sunday?
Absolutely. And thank you so much for having me on, Mary. This was so much fun. It was an absolute blast. I'm not a huge college football fan. I need to do that now that I'm in the South. But I went to UConn. We didn't really,
Huskies.
Yeah. So
You're in women's basketball.
Right. That's exactly right. But Sunday, I'm all about the Colts. Jonathan Taylor's my guy. I think we got a decent team this year. We'll see how it works out.
Okay. All right. Well, we are in the thick of NFL season. We're just entering the Major League Baseball playoffs, and the World Series is right around the corner. So for any sports fan out there, and basketball isn't far away, Colts and all the other NFL teams are definitely giving us something to look forward to on Sundays. And Jack, again, this has been fantastic. I wish you all the best as you continue to be that bridge for the folks who just roll their eyes and say, I don't know what to do here. I can tell that you are someone who really does make a difference.
Awesome. I really appreciate that, Mary Lou. And thanks so much for doing what you do and keeping the podcast going. You do such a good job at it.
Hey team, Mary Lou here. Who's number one in football changes from year to year. Fashion trends come and go, same with musical tastes. But leadership skills, they never go out of style. In fact, these days, leadership is an essential survival skill for a world that demands more from us than ever before. To succeed these days, you need to know how to show up for yourself so that you can then do the work you love with people you like the way you want. The Play Your Position Leadership Playbook helps you do this, and it's free. Go to pyppodcast.com to download your copy today. If being more successful this year, next year, in the 21st century is on your to-do list, get your copy of the Play Your Position Leadership Playbook now. pyppodcast.com. It's at the top of the page. You can't miss it. That's pyppodcast.com, and start being more of the leader you are meant to be today. This podcast was produced by Daniel Romeros. Show notes for this episode can be found over at pyppodcast.com. I'm Mary Lou Kaiser. Thanks for listening.
Here at the Play Your Position podcast, we believe that the road to self-mastery and a life well lived starts with answering the call to leadership. That's when the fun really begins. Send this episode to any friends who might need to hear the inspiration and ideas you heard today. And feel free to rate and review us on your favorite podcast platform.